The summer of 1974 in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, was unremarkably humid, the kind of thick air that clings to your clothes and refuses to move. But for Jack and Janet Smurl, newly relocated to a modest duplex on Chase Street, the stillness of that summer was not one of peace. It was a warning, buried in silence. From the moment they moved in, the house felt wrong. It wasn't the chipped paint or the way the floorboards moaned like sleepers turning in bed. It was something beneath that. A heaviness. A tension in the air, like the house was holding its breath. It began subtly. A stain on the wall that kept returning no matter how many times Janet scrubbed it away. Lights that flickered just as Jack entered the room, but held steady for everyone else. The television would hiss static late into the night, even when unplugged. The smell came next. It drifted through the vents like a secret, sulfur and rotten meat, fleeting but unmistakable. They blamed it on plumbing, maybe a dead animal under the house. Jack even crawled under the floorboards, flashlight in hand, only to find nothing but silence and dust. Then came the sounds. At first, they were whispers, low murmurs that Janet heard while folding laundry upstairs. She'd pause, heart hammering, straining to catch words that slithered just out of reach. Then came footsteps, heavy ones, crossing the attic floor, always when they were alone, always when it was too late to call anyone for help. By autumn, the Smurls were exhausted, emotionally threadbare and sleep-deprived. Janet began to keep the Bible by her nightstand, though she didn't attend church much. Jack dismissed her worry, trying to stay rational. But even he couldn't explain the night the bedroom mirror cracked from the inside. It wasn't until their daughter Dawn screamed in the middle of the night that everything changed. Her voice was raw, a rasp of panic that jolted them out of bed. They found her huddled in the corner of her room, shaking, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. "It was watching me," she whispered. "It was in the closet." Jack opened it. Nothing. But he would later admit, though only to Janet, that the air in the closet was ice cold. Days turned into weeks. Each member of the Smurl family began experiencing things, strange dreams, waking hallucinations, the sensation of being touched when no one was near. Janet was pushed down the stairs. The family dog, normally calm, refused to enter the basement and whimpered at night, facing empty corners. The house wasn't just haunted, it was infested. Eventually, out of desperation, Jack contacted the only people he thought could help: Ed and Lorraine Warren, paranormal investigators, demonologists. Some called them frauds, others called them saviors. But the Smurls no longer cared about reputation. They needed answers. The Warrens agreed to visit, but even they, in all their years of confronting the supernatural, would later describe what they found in the Smurl home as one of the darkest, most dangerous cases of their lives. What had begun as whispers was about to become war. The Warrens arrived on a grey morning in November, just as the skies hung low and heavy with unfallen snow. Ed Warren stepped out first, stocky, serious, his eyes scanning the property like a soldier entering a war zone. Lorraine followed close behind, clutching her rosary, her face pale with the distant expression she wore when she was sensing something other. Janet met them at the door. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "You're early," she said. Ed looked past her, into the dim hallway. "We had to be," Inside, the house was colder than it should have been. Though the furnace rattled in the basement, the heat never seemed to linger. Lorraine paused on the threshold, her gaze fixed at the staircase. "There's something upstairs," she murmured, almost inaudibly. The investigation began in silence. Ed unpacked his equipment, tape recorders, a reel-to-reel, 2 crucifixes, and a bottle of holy water. Lorraine, meanwhile, moved through the house like she was drifting underwater. Her eyes fluttered. Her hand hovered above furniture that creaked when she passed, though no weight touched it. "It's layered," she said, eyes closed, one palm pressed to the wall near the living room. "There isn't just one spirit here. There's multiple, but one of them is old." Ancient Janet clutched Jack's hand. "How old?" Lorraine didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward the hallway closet, the same one their daughter Dawn had screamed about. "I want to see inside." Janet hesitated. "There's nothing there." Lorraine opened the door. Blackness. Not darkness, blackness. The kind of void that swallows light. She stood at the edge, eyes narrowing. Then her knees buckled. Ed rushed forward and caught her. Lorraine's head lolled to the side, her breathing shallow, her lips trembling with the whisper of a language neither of the Smurls recognized. "Is she okay?" Jack asked. "She's communicating," Ed said. "It's trying to talk through her." Suddenly, Lorraine gasped and gripped Ed's forearm. Her voice was hoarse, urgent. "It knows we're here. It's angry." Ed didn't flinch. "Let it be angry. We're not leaving." That night, the Warrens stayed in the house, refusing to sleep. Ed set up cameras, positioned the crucifixes in each corner of the home, and kept a Bible open in the center of the kitchen table. Lorraine burned blessed incense and walked the halls, muttering prayers under her breath. At 3:09 a.m., the house groaned, not like wood settling or pipes adjusting, but something deeper, more guttural, like the very foundation of the house had exhaled. Then the bedroom door slammed shut on its own, with a force so violent the hinges screamed. The tape recorder in the living room caught everything. The door, the thudding footsteps that followed, and, beneath it all, a low growl. When they played the tape back the next morning, everyone froze. "Leave them to me," the voice said. Unmistakable, malevolent, non-human. Jack buried his head in his hands. Janet sobbed quietly, and Lorraine looked up, her expression grave. "This isn't just a ghost," she said. "It's a demon." Ed nodded solemnly. "And it has no intention of letting go." Outside, snow had begun to fall, slow and silent. Inside, something had begun to wake. The next night, the air in the Smurl home was unnaturally still, like the calm before a storm. The ticking of the wall clock seemed louder, the shadows longer. Lorraine sat quietly in the living room with her eyes closed, fingers wrapped tightly around her rosary, lips moving in a near-silent prayer. Ed placed a large wooden crucifix on the coffee table and opened his worn copy of the Rituale Romanum, the Catholic manual of exorcisms and blessings. His voice, steady and sharp, cut through the stillness. "We begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." The Smurl family huddled on the couch, barely breathing. Even the dog, normally restless, sat stone still, its ears perked, its gaze fixed on something invisible in the hallway. Lorraine suddenly stiffened. "It It's coming. The temperature dropped, fast. Janet's breath came out in fog. The lights flickered once, then died. The room went black, save for the dim flame of a single candle Ed had lit earlier, which flickered wildly, as if caught in an invisible wind. Then the sound returned, a low, deep rumble, like thunder buried under the floorboards. Jack jumped. "Did you hear that?" Ed kept his eyes on the hallway. "Don't speak. Just stay together." The rumble grew louder, then turned into scratching, at the walls, the ceiling, even beneath the floor. It was as though 100 clawed hands were trying to break through the plaster and wood. The crucifix on the table began to vibrate, then tipped over. Lorraine cried out and gripped her head. "I can see it," she gasped. "It's huge. It's not human. It's covered in..." She stopped. Her eyes rolled back. Ed shouted, "Lorraine, stay with me." She dropped to her knees, convulsing. Janet rushed to help her, but Ed held up a hand. "Don't touch her. It's using her. It's trying to make a connection." The flame on the candle went out. Darkness. Then, out of the silence, a voice hissed from the far corner of the room. "You're mine now." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was cold, wet, and full of hunger. Like something that had waited centuries to speak again. Suddenly, the air pulsed. A wave of force pushed outward from the hallway, knocking picture frames off the walls. The crucifix shot across the room and embedded itself in the drywall. The entity was revealing itself. Lorraine gasped and pointed toward the hallway, where the darkness had thickened into something almost physical, dense and pulsing. From it, a tall, distorted shape slowly emerged. Its limbs were too long, its face too smooth. It moved like it was dripping in and out of dimensions. "It's feeding on fear," Lorraine whispered. "That's how it stays." Ed grabbed the holy water and began the first rites of deliverance. "Exorcizo te, immundissim spiritus." As he chanted, the house fought back. A deafening crack erupted overhead as the light fixture tore from the ceiling and crashed to the floor. The windows slammed shut one by one. Dawn, still clutching her blanket, began to scream. Not at what she saw, but at what she felt. An overwhelming pressure like hands around her throat. The demon shrieked, an unholy sound that bent the air, a sound no human mouth could make. It filled the room and crawled into their ears, into their bones. "In nomine Jesu Christi, impero tibi, recede," Ed roared. Lorraine's eyes snapped open. Her voice joined his. "You are not welcome here. You have no claim." There was a final burst of cold, one last violent shove of unseen energy, and then silence. The shape in the hallway dissolved. The shadows retreated. The pressure lifted like a great weight pulled from their chests. The family sat in stunned silence. The crucifix lay on the floor. Lorraine wiped her brow, trembling. "It's gone," Ed whispered. But then he looked at Janet, at her pale face, her shivering form. "No," Lorraine said. "It's not gone. It's just hiding." Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Inside, the house held its breath once again. The house didn't retaliate immediately. After the Warrens' first confrontation, a strange calm settled over Chase Street. The air warmed. The walls stopped whispering. The furniture stayed still. For 2 full days, the Smurls dared to hope. But evil doesn't retreat. It waits. It adapts. And now, it wanted the children. On the third night, around 2 a.m., A soft whimper echoed through the hallway. Janet, half asleep, stirred in bed. At first, she thought it was the dog, but then she heard it again, closer this time. A child's voice. "Mommy." She bolted upright. Jack was still beside her, sound asleep. She rushed to the girl's room and found both daughters fast asleep, their faces peaceful, untouched. But the voice came again, right behind her this time. "Mommy, I'm cold." She spun around. The hallway was empty and freezing. The next morning, things began to slip. Dawn's personality changed. Once bright and bubbly, she now sat for hours without speaking, staring at the corner of her bedroom. Her drawings, usually flowers and animals, turned to twisted black spirals and figures with eyeless faces. The youngest, Heather, woke up covered in scratches. Long red welts crisscrossed her back like the imprint of claws. When Janet asked what happened, Heather simply whispered, "The shadow man didn't want me to sleep." In the kitchen, chairs moved on their own again, but now only when the children were alone. Toys spoke in voices they weren't programmed to have. The television turned on by itself, playing static interlaced with garbled phrases in Latin. Ed returned the next night. He brought a priest with him this time. Father Frank Brennan was young, with tired eyes and a reluctance in his posture. The church had not officially sanctioned an exorcism yet, but the priest agreed to bless the home, sensing the urgency in Ed's tone. The blessing was short, too short. As he sprinkled holy water in the girl's room, a scream erupted from the hallway. Not human, not even close. The sound sent a shockwave through the house, knocking every photo from the walls. Dawn's window shattered inward, glass raining down like a violent snowstorm. In the living room, the crucifix twisted upside down on its own nail. Heather was lifted from her bed, levitated, her body writhing in midair, eyes wide and glowing yellow. It took both Jack and Ed to hold her down, while Lorraine screamed prayers, and Father Brennan clutched his crucifix so tightly his knuckles turned white. And then, just as suddenly, she dropped. No pulse for 10 seconds. Then a gasp. She returned. She wouldn't speak for 2 days. Lorraine was shaken. She pulled Janet aside that night and said softly, "You need to understand. This thing doesn't want to frighten you anymore. That phase is over." Janet frowned. "Then what does it want?" "It wants despair, doubt. It wants you to believe God isn't coming, that there is no one left to save you." Jack, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. "It's working." He hadn't been sleeping. He'd begun seeing things in the mirror, his own face, but wrong. Grinning when he wasn't, moving when he wasn't. And he'd started hearing his name whispered not once, but constantly, any time he was alone. "I don't know how much longer we can take this," he whispered. "It's breaking us." Lorraine nodded, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "That's its goal. If it can isolate you, it can own you." She looked up at the ceiling. It's still here, and it's only just begun. There is a threshold in every haunting, an invisible line. At first, the entity lurks. It frightens, it warns. But once it has rooted itself deep enough, once the fear has rotted into hopelessness, it crosses that threshold. It doesn't just visit, it moves in. Jack Smurl woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. He didn't know why. only that something had entered the room. His chest felt heavy, as if someone was sitting on it. He tried to move but couldn't. Sleep paralysis, maybe. Then came the sound. Breathing, low, wet, just inches from his ear. He tried to cry out for Janet, who slept soundly beside him, but no words came, only the sound of his own breath and something else, something inside the room, or maybe inside him. He couldn't tell. The pressure lifted suddenly and he gasped, free. He sat upright and turned on the lamp. Nothing. The room was quiet. Then he looked down. 3 perfect scratches, red and raw, marked his chest. They hadn't been there the day before. The next morning, the family gathered in the living room, their faces pale. Lorraine had been doing automatic writing in the kitchen, a form of communication with spirits. She sat at the table, pages spread in front of her. The handwriting wasn't hers. It was jagged, spidery, inconsistent in pressure and size. One word repeated over and over, mine. Ed stood behind her, reading each page with growing concern. It's escalating. Possession is no longer a risk. It's the goal. Janet trembled. But we've fought back. We've prayed. We've blessed the house. Why is it still getting stronger? Ed's jaw clenched, because something's still feeding it. There's a wound somewhere, a doorway, and until we find it, it will keep crawling deeper. Lorraine turned to Janet slowly. Has Jack been different lately? Janet hesitated. He's been distant. He doesn't eat much. He hardly sleeps. That night Jack changed. He vanished for nearly 3 hours. When he returned, he had no memory of where he'd gone. His shoes were soaked. His hands were caked in black mud. He said he remembered walking into the backyard and then waking up in the bathroom. The mirror in the upstairs hall cracked that night from the inside, and the smell returned. Sulfur and decay seeping into the walls. Then came the possession. It wasn't theatrical. No spinning heads or contorted limbs. Just a look in Jack's eyes. A gleam of something else. At first it flickered during arguments. Moments of rage that didn't feel like him. He shouted. He cursed. He broke things. But the worst part? He smiled while doing it. Then it got worse. He began waking up in places he didn't remember going. He began speaking Latin in his sleep. One night, he stood at the foot of his daughter's beds for nearly an hour, just staring, silently. When Janet found him, he turned and said, "They'll burn beautifully," in a voice that wasn't his. That was the moment she knew. Jack was no longer alone in his own body. The Warrens acted quickly. They arranged for a full-blown minor rite of exorcism, the most they could do without the full blessing of the Catholic Church. Father Brennan returned, visibly shaken. They gathered in the basement, the darkest place in the house, the place where Lorraine said the entity was strongest. The place, she believed, the doorway had opened. The ritual began. "Exorcizo te, omnis spiritus immunde," Jack growled. Not screamed, growled. His eyes rolled back. His fingers twisted into claws. Lorraine and Janet held hands and prayed as Ed continued reading, louder, faster. The house responded. Pipes burst. Plaster cracked. The lights surged. Objects flew from the walls. The room filled with a roar, a deep, furious scream of something not of this world, shaking the very foundation of the house. Then silence. Jack collapsed. Steam rose from his skin. They waited and waited. He awoke hours later with no memory of what had happened. But the next morning, Lorraine found a message scratched into the cellar wall, long and crude, etched into the concrete with something sharp. You can't save what's already mine. It was Lorraine who first sensed that the answer wasn't in the house, it was beneath it. There's something buried here, she whispered one morning, standing barefoot on the cold basement floor. Something that was never supposed to wake up. While Jack recovered in silence upstairs, his memory shattered and his soul still fogged, Ed poured himself into research. He scoured old records, spoke to local historians, and unearthed faded maps at the Wilkes-Barre Public Archive. What he found chilled him. The land on Chase Street had not always been suburban. In the early 1800s, it was part of a forgotten mining outpost, a cluster of families that lived off the land and its coal. But before that, it had another name, Black Hollow. It wasn't on most maps anymore. Locals had long since buried the name along with the mines. But in a journal dated 1831, written by a township surveyor named Reuben Hakes, Ed found a disturbing entry. The earth here is restless. My men say the old shafts moan at night. I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in curses. And someone put something evil here long before we laid stone. The final page of the journal mentioned a discovery made during a dig. A sealed pit, buried under layers of iron and stone. It had no purpose, no structure around it, just a hole in the ground with markings burned into its rim. The crew tried to open it. 1 week later, a fire consumed the entire encampment. Only 2 people survived, and both were committed to Danville State Hospital months later, raving about a creature that had climbed out of the dark. That shaft, Ed realized, had once run directly beneath the land where the Smurl house now stood. It wasn't just an accident. It was a burial site. Lorraine returned to the basement with Ed that night. They brought dowsing rods, holy water, and a small relic from a case they'd investigated years before. A medallion said to tremble in the presence of demonic force. At 2:14 a.m., beneath the flickering bulb, the medallion shook violently. The rods crossed in Lorraine's hands. The floor below them seemed to vibrate, almost imperceptibly, but real. Then Ed saw it, a faint circle in the floor, not quite visible, but present. The concrete had been poured unevenly. Under it, something had once been filled in, buried. "This is it," Ed whispered. "The pit." They couldn't dig, not without risking collapse, but they didn't need to, because something was already climbing back out. That night, Janet dreamed of a man with no eyes. He stood at the foot of her bed, whispering nonsense words over and over, until they stopped being nonsense, until they became names. She woke up screaming. She remembered 3 of them. The next day, Lorraine found those same names in the town archives. Records from 1861. 3 children, all found dead in their home just a mile from where the Smurl house now stood. Their bodies were never recovered, but their teeth had been found, arranged in a circle, deep in a collapsed mineshaft. The pit wasn't just a burial ground. It was a ritual site, and someone, long before the Smurls ever moved in, had used that site to call something up. A summoning, a sacrifice, an invitation. That evening, Lorraine stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the trees as the wind moved through them with unnatural grace. "This thing doesn't haunt the house," she said softly. "It owns the land. The walls are just its skin." Ed turned from his notes. "So what do we do?" She looked at him, her face pale and drawn. "We stopped treating it like a ghost." She took a breath. "We're in a war with something ancient, and it never left, because it was never driven out in the first place." Outside, the wind carried a laugh that didn't belong to anyone alive. And in the basement, beneath concrete and time, something began to stir. It was nearly dusk when the call came. Ed answered the phone with a hand that trembled despite years of experience. Across the line, a voice spoke calmly, clearly. "Authorization has been granted. Rome has reviewed the case. A full, solemn rite is permitted." Ed's eyes met Lorraine's. "It's happening." The preparation took 2 days. Father Daniel Everett, a seasoned exorcist from Scranton, was assigned by the diocese. He arrived not in fear, but with a solemnity that cast a heavy hush over the home. He was older than they expected, quiet, weathered, and thin as bone. But his eyes, they held something ancient, something resolute. Before stepping over the threshold, Father Everett whispered a prayer and pressed a small crucifix to the front door. The wood hissed at the contact. Steam curled from it. Everyone heard it. The house knew what was coming. The Smurls' home was sealed, windows boarded, mirrors covered, holy water sprinkled in every room. At 3 p.m., the hour of mercy, the ritual began. Lorraine, rosary in hand, sat beside Janet. Ed and Father Everett stood in the living room, where the air was thick as smoke. Candles flickered wildly despite the stillness of the air. "Let God arise," Father Everett began, voice firm. "Let his enemies be scattered." The lights dimmed, then movement, subtle at first. A creak in the hallway, a whisper in the vents, a soft rustling like insects beneath the floorboards. Then the temperature dropped. The dog began to bark, then howl, then whimper. Suddenly Jack screamed. He clutched his head and dropped to his knees. Blood ran from his nose. He looked up, but it wasn't Jack looking back. His eyes were black, no whites, no pupils, only void. He opened his mouth and let out a sound no human throat should make, part scream, part laughter, part something else entirely. The crucifix on the wall cracked down the center. "Do not answer it," Father Everett commanded. "It is not your husband." But it spoke anyway. "He's in here," it rasped. "So deep down, he can see what I see. Do you know what I see?" It turned to Janet, smiling with teeth that weren't his. "I see you begging in your sleep, and no one comes." Janet sobbed. Lorraine shielded her with her body. Father Everett raised the Bible. "I adjure you, ancient serpent, by the judge of the living and the dead, depart from this servant of God." The house screamed, not a single voice, but hundreds. Children, women, men screaming in unison, trapped in the very walls. The floor vibrated. Furniture slid violently across the room, slamming into walls. From the kitchen, a drawer burst open. Knives rose into the air, trembling, pointing, then dropped as Father Everett stepped forward, chanting louder, faster. Ed joined in, pressing a relic, bone of a saint, against Jack's forehead. Smoke rose. Jack screamed again, this time his voice. "It's in my spine, it's crawling. I can feel it in my veins. I cast you out," Everett shouted. "Unclean spirit. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you, be gone." The wind outside howled. The basement door flew open with a crash. From within it, a shadow began to pour, not like smoke, but like liquid darkness crawling up the stairs, reaching toward the living room. Lorraine screamed, "It's coming up. That's its body." Everett threw holy water in the direction of the door. The shadow shrieked and recoiled, hissing as it burned. And then, the final prayer. "By the blood of Christ, by the power of his resurrection, by the Spirit that sanctifies the earth, I bind you, I cast you, I curse you, I seal you back into the pit." Jack convulsed violently, then froze. A sound burst through the room like the crack of thunder, and suddenly everything stopped. The air cleared, the shadow vanished, the candles steadied. Jack collapsed, unconscious but breathing. Father Everett dropped to his knees, sweat pouring down his face. "It's done," he whispered. But Lorraine didn't move. She stared at the hallway where the darkness had receded. "It's not gone," she said softly. "Not entirely. The pit is still open." Ed nodded. "Then we seal it, forever." That night, the Warrens began the final cleansing. Prayers, salt, blessed earth. And with Father Everett's help, they laid a barrier so complete that no spirit, not even something that old, could cross again. But even now, years later, Lorraine would sometimes wake in the middle of the night and feel it. A pressure in the air, a whisper in her ear, a reminder. The land never forgets, and what sleeps in the pit dreams of waking. The house still stands. Even now, on Chase Street, the small two-story home sits in quiet defiance of its history. New owners live there. Children play in the yard. The windows are clean and the curtains drawn. But those who lived through it, the Smurls, the Warrens, Father Everett, know the truth. Some places don't forget. After the exorcism, the Smurls left the house for good. They moved across town and tried to rebuild. Jack, forever altered, spent years trying to reconcile what he'd seen and what he'd felt. The weight of a presence inside his very skin. Janet never quite slept the same again. Even in their new home, she would sometimes wake at 3 a.m., heart pounding, certain that something was watching from the shadows just beyond the hallway light. The children grew. The memories dulled, but never fully died. They spoke of the old house only in whispers, like a scar they all wore but couldn't explain. Ed and Lorraine Warren documented everything. They presented their findings to the church, to skeptics, to anyone who would listen. Some called them liars, others heroes. But Lorraine never sought applause. She kept a jar of soil from the basement in her private office for years, blessed, sealed, wrapped in rosary. Not as a trophy, she told Ed once, as a warning. Father Everett died a decade later, quietly, peacefully. But the diary he left behind revealed something unsettling. "I no longer believe evil simply visits. It roots, it waits, and if the land is ever wounded again, if blood is ever spilled or pain ever festers, the gate may open once more." To this day, no confirmed activity has reoccurred on Chase Street. But in late autumn, when the wind cuts through the trees just right, and the basement door creaks open with no one near it, some swear they still hear it. A laugh, a voice in the walls, a whisper from the deep, "I remember you." And the land quiet, heavy, watching, remains, waiting. If you think this story is over, think again. Darkness doesn't end, it waits, and the next one might be closer than you think. Subscribe before it finds you first.